The Empire's grasp tightens. In the shadow of the galaxy's endless stars, the Empire's iron grip tightened around every human colony. For decades, the Galactic Empire had held control over the human race, crushing any hope of rebellion under its colossal fleets. Yet, in secret, the resistance was growing. Behind the Empire's back, humanity was planning its greatest defiance. On the dark, cold bridge of the Relentless, a massive warship built by the rebels, General Elias Kane stood tall, staring out at the stars through the viewports. His face was grave, his eyes focused on the holographic map of the galaxy. The map was filled with red markers, symbols for each colony under the Empire's control. But there was one small green dot in the far corner of the map, humanity's last stronghold, the Genesis fleet. Elias knew the Empire wouldn't stop. They had crushed the human colonies one by one. The people of Earth had endured their cruelty for too long. But now, it was time for humanity to strike back. The Relentless was ready. And so were they. General Kane, a voice called from behind him. Elias turned to see his most trusted officer, Captain Leah Voss, walking toward him with a serious look on her face. Her sharp eyes scanned the map, and she paused before speaking. "We've received a message from the Empire." Elias's heart sank. He already knew what it was. The Empire never played fair. They always demanded total submission, and humanity was tired of bowing to their oppressive rule. But this message was different. It wasn't just a threat. It was the final warning. Leah activated the holo-communication system. The image of the Empire's leader, Emperor Zoran, appeared. His cold, calculating eyes seemed to pierce through the hologram, and his deep, menacing voice filled the room. "People of the human race," Zoran's voice echoed, "you have resisted long enough, and your actions are nothing more than a nuisance. Surrender now, or face the consequences. Your pathetic rebellion is nothing compared to the might of the Galactic Empire. You have no place in the galaxy." The hologram flickered as Zoran continued, "This is your final warning. The Empire will show you mercy if you bow before us. Otherwise, we will burn your worlds, one by one." The transmission ended, leaving an eerie silence in the room. Leah's face was tense, her fists clenched. "He thinks we'll give up. He's wrong." Elias's expression remained calm, but inside, his blood boiled. Emperor Zoran had underestimated them. The message was meant to crush their spirit, to break their will. But Elias knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. It was time to stop hiding. "We won't surrender," Elias said quietly but firmly. "Prepare to send a message of our own." He turned to Leah and the rest of his crew. "We'll show them that humanity has not forgotten how to fight. No matter how powerful the Empire thinks they are, they've forgotten one thing. Humanity will never bow." Leah nodded, and the team sprang into action. Every corner of the Relentless became a flurry of movement. Soldiers armed themselves, technicians scrambled to prepare the communication systems, and pilots prepped the ships for battle. Elias walked down the long corridor, his boots echoing against the metal floor. His mind raced as he thought about what was at stake. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for freedom. It was humanity's last chance to claim its place in the galaxy. The message they would send wasn't one of surrender. It was a warning to the Empire. A final declaration. Elias knew that the Empire's forces were vast, their fleets nearly endless, but they were not invincible. They were just arrogant, thinking that they could rule the stars forever. The time for mercy had passed. The time for resistance had come. Leah joined him at the command center. She looked at Elias, her expression one of fierce determination. "The message is ready to send." Elias stood beside her, his hand resting on the console. "Send it. Let them know humanity is coming." The screen flashed to life, and the face of General Elias Kane appeared, his image clear and strong. His voice rang out, filled with the weight of years of suffering, of people who had lost everything to the Empire's cruelty. "Emperor Zoran," Elias's voice echoed across the galaxy, You've had your chance to rule. Your tyranny ends here. This is humanity's final warning. If you do not release your hold on our colonies, we will destroy you. We will burn your fleets, and we will take back what's ours. The message was clear. There was no turning back. Elias had given the Empire a choice, but it was a choice they would never take. The war was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of defiance, and humanity would make sure that the Empire would feel the full weight of their wrath. As the message was sent, Elias turned to Leah, his eyes fierce. "Now we wait." Leah nodded, but there was no fear in her eyes, only the fire of a warrior who knew that their battle was just beginning. The Empire had made its final mistake, and they would pay for it. Humanity's resistance was no longer hidden. It was here, and it was ready to burn the stars themselves. The rebellion's last hope. The Relentless hummed with activity as the crew scrambled to prepare for the inevitable. Elias Kane stood before the massive holomap, his mind racing. The Empire's fleet was vast, its power almost unmatched. But humanity had one advantage, one chance to turn the tide in their favor. The message they had sent was just the beginning. The Empire would not bow to threats, and the resistance knew it. It was time to put their plans into action. "General," Leah's voice broke through his thoughts. She had just entered the command center, her expression grim. "The fleet is ready, but there's something else. We've received word about the artifact. It's real." Elias turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. The artifact was something that could change everything. For centuries, legends spoke of an ancient weapon hidden deep within the galaxy, a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of destroying entire fleets in a single blow. It had been humanity's greatest hope and greatest fear. Leah continued, "We've located its coordinates. It's on the far side of the galaxy, deep in the Oort expanse, but the Empire will already be on its way." Elias felt a wave of cold certainty wash over him. Time was not on their side. The Empire would stop at nothing to find this weapon. And if they did, humanity's rebellion would be crushed before it had even started. "We can't afford to lose it," Elias said firmly. "Prepare a squadron. We're going after that artifact." Leah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll have the ships ready in an hour." As she left, Elias stood alone in the command center, staring at the stars. He could almost hear the Empire's ships, their engines roaring in the distance, closing in on the rebellion. Their numbers were overwhelming, and the Empire's ruthlessness knew no bounds. But Elias knew that if humanity could find the artifact before the Empire, they could change the course of this war. The Relentless broke free of the asteroid field where it had been hiding, and the fleet followed, moving like a shadow through the cold emptiness of space. Elias and his team, led by Captain Voss, made their way to the distant corner of the galaxy, where the artifact lay waiting. The journey wasn't easy. They had to pass through dangerous regions of space, where pirate factions roamed, and Empire scouts often patrolled. Every sensor on the Relentless was on high alert, scanning for any sign of the Empire. The tension was palpable. As they neared the Oort expanse, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Empire was out there, somewhere, and the closer they got to the artifact, the more certain he became that the Empire was already aware of their mission. "General," Leah called out from the communications console, "we've detected something strange." Elias turned quickly, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair. "What is it?" "An Empire fleet," she said, her voice tight with worry. "It's too large to be a scout. There are at least 50 capital ships, and they're heading straight for the artifact." Elias's eyes widened. "They know." "We have no choice," Leah said, her voice determined. "We need to move fast." Elias glanced at the stars, then back at his team. "All ships prepare for evasive maneuvers. We have to get to that artifact first, no matter the cost." The Relentless and its fleet moved swiftly, darting through asteroid fields and dodging dangerous space anomalies. The tension in the air was thick, every crew member working with a sense of urgency. Time was running out, and the Empire was closing in. As they neared the coordinates, Elias gave the order to launch the ground team. A small squadron of soldiers, led by Captain Leah Voss herself, would be sent to the planet where the artifact was rumored to be hidden. But as the fleet approached the planet, the sensors blared an alarm. "There's something wrong," the chief engineer, Lieutenant Mara, said in a worried tone. "The planet. It's not as it seems. The readings are all off." Elias stood up, his face hardening. "What are you saying?" "There's a massive energy source beneath the surface," Mara replied. "It looks like the artifact is buried deep, but something else is causing a disturbance in the planet's core." Leah's voice came through the comms. "General, we're about to enter the planet's atmosphere. Should we prepare for hostile action?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Yes. Get to the surface. Now." As the ground team descended toward the planet's surface, the excitement of the mission was tainted with fear. They were about to uncover something that could change everything, but they had no idea what they would find. The unknown had always been humanity's greatest enemy. When the team landed, the air was thick with tension. The planet was silent, its surface barren. As they moved closer to the artifact's location, the ground shook. "We're not alone," Leah muttered under her breath, her weapon raised. Elias and the rest of the team followed her lead, weapons drawn. The ground cracked open, and from the depths, something ancient and powerful stirred. The team's communications crackled with static as the artifact's location became clearer. The ancient structure was unlike anything they had ever seen. It pulsed with energy, and from deep within the ruins, they could hear an eerie hum. Something about the place felt wrong. The energy that surrounded the artifact wasn't just technological, it was alive. Suddenly, a blast of energy shot up from the planet's surface. The entire team was thrown back, their bodies hitting the ground hard. The artifact was awakening, and it wasn't going to be easy to control. Elias fought to his feet, his eyes narrowing. "We need that weapon," he growled. "If we don't get it, the Empire wins." With that, they pressed forward into the heart of the structure, unaware that the Empire's fleet was already closing in, ready to take the artifact for themselves. The Empire strikes back. The darkness of space was broken only by the light of distant stars. The Relentless and its fleet hovered on the edge of the Oort expanse, just outside the planet's atmosphere. Elias Kane stood at the command console, watching the flickering sensors as the tension in the air grew thicker by the second. The rebels had made it to the artifact, but they were not alone. The Empire had found them. It wasn't a coincidence. Their movements had been too predictable. The Empire had been tracking their every move. "General, we've got company," Captain Leah Voss said, her voice tight with urgency. "The Empire fleet has arrived, and it's bigger than we thought." Elias didn't need to hear more. He knew that the Empire would stop at nothing to crush them, to keep the galaxy under their control. His eyes scanned the screen, and sure enough, the image of the Empire's fleet appeared. Hundreds of ships, led by the Empire's massive dreadnoughts, were closing in fast. "They've got us surrounded," Leah continued, her voice steady despite the pressure. "If we don't act now, we'll be destroyed before we can even use the artifact." Elias gritted his teeth. It was a moment of truth. The artifact had to be secured, but they couldn't let the Empire take it. They had no choice but to fight. "We've got one shot at this," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "All ships, prepare for battle. We can't let the Empire reach the planet. Leah, lead the ground team. We'll hold off the Empire above." Leah nodded and turned to her team, giving them a quick briefing before they headed for the landing crafts. The team would have to fight their way to the artifact, and they didn't have much time. Elias stayed on the bridge, overseeing the battle. The Relentless's massive guns powered up, and the rest of the fleet prepared for the incoming onslaught. The enemy ships were closing in fast, and soon the first shots rang out. The battle for the artifact had begun. The space around the planet erupted into chaos as the two fleets collided. The Empire's ships were massive and heavily armored, while the Rebel fleet relied on speed and strategy. The Relentless was fast, and Elias had planned for every possible move, but even the best plans could falter under the Empire's relentless assault. Evasive maneuvers. Elias barked, his eyes glued to the tactical screen. We need to keep them off our tail. The Relentless veered sharply, dodging a barrage of laser fire that exploded in a brilliant flash behind them. The ships around them followed suit, weaving and dodging in an intricate dance of survival. But the Empire was closing in. Every time the rebels dodged an attack, the Empire retaliated with overwhelming firepower. Elias knew they couldn't hold out forever. They needed the artifact, and they needed it now. Meanwhile, on the surface of the planet, Captain Leah Voss and her team moved swiftly through the alien ruins. The air was thick with tension as they made their way toward the artifact's location. The ground beneath them trembled as though the planet itself was warning them to turn back. The ruins were ancient, older than anything humanity had ever encountered. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step they took. But Leah didn't have time to wonder about the mysteries of the planet. They had a mission. There it is, Leah said, pointing toward a massive structure rising out of the ground. The artifact was hidden inside, but something about it felt off. The energy readings they had picked up earlier were not just a fluke. The artifact was alive, and it was drawing power from the planet's core. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. A deep, low rumble echoed through the ruins as a series of explosions erupted from the distance. The Empire had arrived on the planet's surface. Get to cover, Leah ordered as her team scrambled to find shelter behind the ancient stone pillars. They had no time to waste. The Empire's soldiers were already on their way, and they had to reach the artifact before the Empire did. Leah and her team moved quickly through the ruins, but the Empire's forces were relentless. Stormtroopers and battle droids emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. A firefight broke out, the sound of blaster fire filling the air. Leah fired back, covering her team as they pushed forward. Back in space, the battle was growing more desperate. The Empire's fleet had pushed the rebels into a corner. The Relentless was taking heavy fire, and several ships in the fleet had already been destroyed. The Empire's overwhelming numbers were beginning to take their toll. Elias's fingers flew over the controls as he ordered his ships into a final offensive. They had to hold the line just a little longer. The ground team had almost reached the artifact, and if they could secure it, they might have a chance. We can't hold them off much longer. One of his officers shouted, a note of panic in his voice. The Empire is pushing through. Elias didn't flinch. Hold steady, he said. We fight for humanity. He watched as the Empire's massive dreadnoughts drew closer, their weapons charged and ready. The Relentless had to be in the right position, or they would be torn apart. He keyed in the coordinates, lining up their attack. Firing sequence initiated, the weapons officer reported. The Relentless's cannons roared to life, unleashing a massive wave of firepower. The blast struck the Empire's ships, tearing through their shields and sending enemy vessels spiraling into space. For a moment, it seemed like the tide was turning. The Empire's fleet staggered, its ships faltering under the assault. But Elias knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The Empire was relentless. On the surface, Leah and her team reached the central chamber. The artifact, a massive crystalline structure, pulsed with an eerie glow. It was like nothing they had ever seen, alien, ancient, and powerful. The air around it crackled with energy. Leah, one of her soldiers, gasped, "This thing, it's alive." Leah didn't have time to process the words. "We don't have much time. Get it activated, now." Just as her team moved toward the artifact, a burst of blaster fire erupted from the shadows. Empire soldiers had reached them, and a firefight broke out. Leah dove behind cover, narrowly avoiding the blast. But they had made it this far. They couldn't fail now. The artifact's power unleashed. The air on the surface of the planet was thick with tension. The ruins, ancient and silent moments before, had become a battlefield. Blaster fire rang out, echoing through the crumbling walls of the temple as the Empire's forces closed in on Captain Leah Voss and her team. The artifact, that mysterious crystalline structure, stood just beyond reach, pulsing with a strange energy. It was their only hope, and they had to secure it before the Empire did. "Push forward," Leah shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She fired a series of quick shots at an approaching squad of stormtroopers, forcing them to take cover behind a series of broken pillars. "We need that artifact now." Her team moved with precision, advancing toward the central chamber where the artifact rested. Their training had prepared them for moments like this. High stakes, life and death situations where everything was on the line. But even they couldn't deny the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another battle. This was humanity's last chance to strike back against the Empire. The artifact glowed brighter as they neared it, its energy field sparking in a way that made the hairs on the back of Leah's neck stand up. It was as if the structure was alive, feeding off the very planet it rested on. The ground beneath them trembled again, a warning sign. Something was about to happen, something powerful. "Leah, wait," one of her soldiers called out, his voice filled with concern. Leah spun toward him, her heart racing. "What is it, Sergeant?" "I don't think we're alone," the soldier said, his eyes wide. He pointed to the far side of the chamber, where dark shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. "Something's moving over there." Leah squinted into the darkness. It wasn't just shadows. Something, or someone, was approaching them. Fast. She raised her blaster, ready for whatever came next. But as she stepped forward, a voice boomed from the shadows. "You think you can control it." The voice was cold, filled with malice. Out of the darkness stepped an armored figure, a high-ranking officer of the Empire. His face was hidden behind a dark visor, but his presence was unmistakable. The Imperial officer raised his weapon, his eyes locking onto Leah's. "You're too late, Captain," he sneered. "The Empire will take the artifact, and with it, your pathetic rebellion." Leah's grip on her blaster tightened. "Not if I can help it." Before she could react, the officer triggered his weapon, sending a wave of blaster fire across the room. Leah ducked behind cover, narrowly avoiding the blast. Her team immediately returned fire, creating a deadly crossfire with the Empire's soldiers. As the battle raged around her, Leah's mind stayed focused on the artifact. The Empire had to be stopped, but they couldn't waste any more time. Every moment spent fighting this officer brought them closer to losing the artifact, and with it, their last hope for victory. She turned to her team. "Cover me," she shouted. With determination, Leah sprinted toward the glowing crystal. The energy in the air surged, the artifact reacting to her proximity. The more she moved toward it, the more the ground shook, as if the artifact itself was awakening. Just as her hand reached out to touch the artifact's surface, the room exploded with light. Back in space, General Elias Kane was commanding his fleet with the intensity of a man who had nothing left to lose. The Relentless had been in combat for hours, dodging the Empire's massive fleets, engaging in a relentless fight that seemed to go on forever. His ships were holding their ground, but it was clear that the odds were against them. "We can't keep this up," his tactical officer reported, his voice strained. "The Empire's reinforcements are incoming. We're being overwhelmed." Elias gritted his teeth. "Hold the line. Don't let them through." The rebels' fleet was battered, but Elias knew they couldn't retreat. Every inch of space they fought for was a victory for humanity. The ground team had to succeed. Without the artifact, they had no hope. He glanced toward the command console. It had been a long time since they'd heard from Leah and her team. The connection to the surface was spotty, their communications failing as the battle intensified. Elias couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. They had to secure the artifact, or the Empire would win. Suddenly, the ship's alarm blared, signaling an incoming transmission. Elias didn't hesitate. Put it through. The screen flickered to life, showing Leah's face. She was breathless, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. Her team was still fighting in the background, but she had a message. "We've got it, General," Leah said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "The artifact is in our hands." Elias's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" Leah nodded. "It's activated." But she paused, glancing over her shoulder. "We're not alone. The Empire is coming." Before Elias could respond, the transmission cut out. The connection was lost. "Damn it," Elias muttered under his breath. "Hold on, Leah." He turned to his crew. "Get us to the planet. Now." On the surface, Leah could feel the power of the artifact coursing through the air. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something far older, far more dangerous. She had never felt anything like it. The air crackled with energy, and the planet's surface seemed to pulse in time with the artifact. But the Empire wasn't finished yet. The officer who had confronted Leah earlier was not alone. More Imperial forces had arrived, and they were closing in fast. Leah turned to her team, her face hardening. "We need to get to the extraction point. Now." But as she led the way, the ground beneath them shook violently. The artifact's power seemed to be destabilizing the planet itself, causing cracks to form in the floor. The air grew hotter, the energy growing more intense with each passing second. Leah's thoughts raced. The artifact was not just a weapon. It was a force of nature, capable of reshaping the galaxy itself. And they were the ones who held it. The fate of the rebellion, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was in their hands. But the Empire was closing in. They had no time to waste. "Move out," Leah shouted, leading her team through the shaking ruins. They had to make it to the ship. The Relentless would be their only chance to escape, and they couldn't risk losing the artifact. Above, in the midst of the brutal space battle, Elias ordered his fleet to make a final stand. The Empire's forces were closing in on both the Relentless and the planet, but Elias had one last plan. The artifact's power had to be unleashed, and with it, humanity's final strike. "Prepare the final assault," Elias said, his voice calm despite the storm around him. "We're going to make sure the Empire remembers who they're dealing with." The final showdown. The planet's surface was shaking as though it were on the brink of collapse. The artifact's power had awakened something deep within the planet's core, something ancient and volatile. Leah Voss and her team, carrying the last hope for humanity, moved as quickly as they could through the collapsing ruins, the walls around them cracking and groaning in protest. The air was thick with static, the energy field created by the artifact pulsing in waves, and each step forward felt like a battle against the very world they were standing on. "Come on. We need to get to the extraction point, now." Leah shouted over the chaos, her voice cutting through the noise of blaster fire and falling debris. Her team was close behind, but every second seemed like an eternity. The Empire was everywhere. Behind them, the sound of approaching Imperial forces grew louder. Stormtroopers and battle droids had arrived in full force. They were closing in, their boots pounding the ground, their weapons ready. The rebels were outnumbered, and the planet itself seemed to be turning against them. Leah's heart raced as she glanced toward the sky. She had to get to the Relentless. Only the flagship could save them now. The fleet was still fighting in space, holding the Empire off, but it was clear that they were losing. The Empire's reinforcements were overwhelming. The glowing light from the artifact illuminated the ruins, casting long shadows as it pulsed with an almost unnatural rhythm. Leah couldn't help but feel the weight of it, the power emanating from it. She had felt it the moment she touched it, the raw, untamed energy of the artifact. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature, and they were carrying it into the hands of their enemies. Up in space, General Elias Kane had been maneuvering his fleet in a desperate attempt to hold off the Empire. Their forces were thinning, their ships taking heavy damage. But Elias had a plan, one last, desperate plan. If they could use the artifact's power, they might just be able to turn the tide. "Prepare to fire the final sequence," Elias commanded, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the decision. The artifact's energy had already started to disrupt the Empire's fleet. If they could harness it, the Empire might be forced to retreat. The tension on the bridge was palpable. The Relentless's weapons were locked, charged, and ready. They had one shot at this. Suddenly, a transmission came through. "General, this is Leah." Leah's voice crackled over the comms, strained and urgent. "We've got the artifact, but we need extraction, now. The Empire's closing in." Elias's eyes narrowed. They didn't have much time. "Hold on, Leah. We're coming to get you." Back on the planet's surface, Leah and her team were still pushing forward, the sound of the Empire's forces echoing ever closer. They had reached the edge of the ruined city, the transport ships waiting in the distance. But then the ground shook violently again. A massive explosion rippled through the air, and the sky above them lit up with the fiery glow of an incoming barrage. The Empire had found them. "Go, go, go," Leah shouted, urging her team forward. The transport ships were their only chance now. They had to reach them before the Empire could stop them. The ground beneath their feet split open as another explosion rocked the area, sending a shockwave of heat and debris. Leah dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. Her team was scattered, but they quickly regrouped, pushing forward with determination. "Leah," one of her soldiers called, pointing to the sky. "The Relentless is coming in." Leah looked up, relief flooding her chest. The flagship was descending through the smoke, its massive hull cutting through the clouds as it made its final approach. It was their only hope. But as the transport ships came into view, so too did the Empire's forces. Stormtroopers lined the path, and large, menacing war droids stalked toward them, their weapons aimed. The rebels were trapped. Leah cursed under her breath. They had no choice. It was either fight or die. In space, Elias was ready. The Relentless's cannons charge, the energy from the artifact feeding into the ship's weapon systems. It was now or never. "Fire," Elias commanded. The energy blast that erupted from the Relentless was unlike anything they had ever seen. The shockwave rippled across space, tearing through the Empire's fleet. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their hulls disintegrating under the intense heat of the blast. But the Empire wasn't finished yet. A massive Imperial dreadnought loomed in the distance, its guns charging for a final strike. Elias knew they had no time left. "Rebels, form up on the Relentless." Elias shouted over the comms. "We need to finish this now." The remaining rebel ships rallied, using the cover of the Relentless to move in for a final decisive strike against the Empire. It was a battle to the death, and there could be no retreat. On the ground, Leah and her team fought their way to the transport ships. The Empire's forces were everywhere. Droids, soldiers, and the towering dreadnoughts that loomed overhead, casting long, menacing shadows over the battlefield. Leah fired a shot, taking down an advancing soldier, then turned to see her team moving toward the transport. They were close, so close, but the Empire's forces were closing in on all sides. The air crackled with energy as the artifact's power surged again, and Leah knew they couldn't hold out much longer. The Empire would stop at nothing to take it back. "We're almost there," Leah shouted. But as the transport ships opened their hatch to receive them, a familiar figure emerged from the smoke. The Imperial officer, the one who had tried to stop them earlier, was back. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A battalion of stormtroopers and battle droids followed him. "Do you really think you can escape, Captain?" The officer sneered, his weapon raised. Leah didn't hesitate. "We don't have time for this." With a quick motion, she activated the artifact. The ground trembled once again, and the sky above seemed to crack open. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the artifact, and the officer and his forces were blown back, their weapons disintegrating in the explosion. The power of the artifact was unleashed, a devastating force that shook the battlefield to its core. Leah's team sprinted to the transport, the doors closing just as the explosion subsided. The Relentless hovered above them, its engines roaring as it prepared for liftoff. With the Empire in retreat, Leah and her team had won. For now, the artifact's price. The sky above the planet was burning. The Relentless ascended into the atmosphere, the massive rebel flagship carrying Leah Voss and her team to safety. But the weight of their victory was not a cause for celebration. They had secured the artifact, but its power was something none of them could fully understand, something far beyond anything they had imagined. Even now, as the ship's engines hummed with the strain of its ascent, the artifact's influence rippled across the atmosphere, distorting the air around it like a storm waiting to break. Leah sat in the command deck, her fingers resting on the artifact's containment box. It was locked securely, but the glow from within pulsed through the clear surface, brighter than it had ever been. The artifact wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature, and no one had a clear idea of how to wield it. How much longer until we're out of range of the planet's gravitational pull? Leah asked, her voice steady but filled with the stress of the situation. 5 minutes, Captain, came the response from the navigator. His face was pale, and Leah could see the unease in his eyes. That unease was shared by everyone aboard. The artifact was powerful, yes, but it was also dangerous. It had already disrupted the very fabric of the planet's core, and it was only a matter of time before it could cause a disaster on a much larger scale. The planet's surface was beginning to crack apart, whole continents shifting under the artifact's immense energy. And that wasn't the only problem. Leah, General Elias Kane's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the tense silence on the bridge. We've detected a new Imperial fleet coming in. They've already started tracking your position. Leah's breath caught in her throat. Another fleet. The Empire was relentless. They hadn't just thrown everything at them in space. Now they were mobilizing a second wave to capture the artifact, no matter the cost. Do we have time to make the jump to hyperspace? Leah asked, her voice tense. The navigator quickly tapped on his console, calculating. Not if we don't shake them off. They'll catch us before we can jump. We need to lose them first. Leah's mind raced. There was no time. The Relentless couldn't fight a fleet that outnumbered them. If they didn't make it out of the planet's atmosphere in time, they would be sitting ducks for the Empire's reinforcements. The artifact had to be protected, but it also had to be used. The rebellion couldn't afford to lose this opportunity. We need to make a decision now, Leah said, her voice filled with determination. We either fight and risk the artifact being destroyed in the process, or we make a break for it and hope we can outrun them. On the ground, the rebels were still recovering from the chaos of the last few moments. They had narrowly escaped the Empire's grasp, but the reality of their situation was just beginning to sink in. The Relentless had successfully made it off the planet, but the war was far from over. Their communications were patchy, and the galaxy's survival rested on their ability to understand the artifact's power. Captain Leah Voss stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars beyond. She was tired, physically and emotionally drained from the intense battle. But her thoughts were focused on what lay ahead. The artifact had changed everything. It was the key to winning the war, but it also posed a threat like no other. If they used it incorrectly, they could destroy everything they had fought for. Her comm device beeped, breaking her from her thoughts. Leah, came Elias's voice, filled with urgency. We have incoming fire. The Empire is closer than we thought. Get ready for evasive maneuvers. The reality hit her like a punch to the gut. The Empire was on their tail. Even with the artifact in their possession, there was no guarantee they would survive. The odds were against them, and every decision they made would determine the fate of humanity. Above the planet, The Empire's fleet loomed larger in the distance. Their ships were a menacing wall of black, slowly closing in on the Relentless like an unstoppable tide. Imperial star destroyers lined up, their cannons charged and ready. "Captain," one of the officers said, "they're moving into firing range. We won't survive a direct hit." Leah's mind raced as she watched the advancing fleet. She had only one choice. They had to use the artifact's power. Now. It was their only chance to break free. "Prepare to deploy the artifact," she ordered, her voice cold and resolute. The crew scrambled into action, adjusting the power systems to accommodate the energy the artifact could unleash. The tension in the air was thick. Leah didn't want to make this decision, but the Empire was closing in, and they didn't have time for hesitation. As the energy from the artifact began to hum throughout the ship, Leah took a deep breath. They had to be ready for the consequences. There was no turning back now. Back in space, the Empire's fleet began to fire. A barrage of laser beams and missiles streaked toward the Relentless, the explosions lighting up the black void of space. The ship rocked violently as the first salvo hit, but Leah didn't flinch. She was focused. "Activate the artifact's core," she commanded. The energy from the artifact flooded into the ship's systems, illuminating the command deck with a strange, ethereal light. Leah's grip tightened on the armrest as the ship's shields flared in response, pushing back the incoming fire with a force that shook the entire fleet. The artifact's power wasn't just a weapon, it was a storm. It tore through the Imperial ships, disintegrating their weapons, crippling their shields, and breaking their formations. Evasive maneuvers. Elias shouted over the comms. The Relentless twisted and dove, narrowly avoiding more blasts. The Empire was reeling, but they wouldn't give up easily. Leah's hands were shaking as she watched the battle unfold. The artifact's power was devastating, but it was also unpredictable. With every blast, she could feel the power of the artifact siphoning energy from the very fabric of space, threatening to tear a hole in the galaxy itself. They had to stop before it was too late. In the final moments of the battle, Leah knew she had to make the hardest decision of all. The artifact's power could either turn the tide of the war or destroy everything they had fought for. She turned to Elias's voice on the comms, her voice filled with grim determination. "Elias, we need to stop this," Leah said quietly. "The artifact is too dangerous." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Agreed. We'll withdraw. Bring it to the rendezvous point. We'll figure it out from there." As the Relentless and the remaining rebel ships made their retreat into hyperspace, the artifact's energy slowly dimmed, but Leah couldn't shake the feeling that they had just narrowly avoided disaster. The galaxy was not yet safe, and humanity's final strike was far from over. The last gamble. The Relentless was quiet, the usual hum of activity now replaced by the eerie stillness that hung over the ship. The crew was exhausted, their bodies worn from the non-stop battle, but it was the weight on their minds that was the heaviest. The artifact had been secured, but its power, uncontrollable and unpredictable, had begun to take its toll. Leah Voss, captain of the Relentless, sat alone in the command center, staring at the pulsating energy of the artifact, now secured in a containment chamber deep within the ship. She had made the decision to withdraw, to escape the Empire's overwhelming force, but it came at a cost. The Empire was not one to relent easily, and they would be back. Soon, Leah's thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from the console. "Captain, you need to see this," came the voice of her first officer, Commander Avelaine. Leah stood up from the chair, her heart pounding in her chest. What could it be now? She rushed to the communications console, where Ava was already waiting, her expression grim. "We've intercepted an Imperial transmission. They've mobilized their final fleet, the Hammer. It's on course to intercept us, and this time, we're not going to outrun them," Ava reported, her voice tight with anxiety. Leah's mind raced. The Hammer was infamous, an Imperial warship that was nearly invincible. It was their final, overwhelming push to crush the rebellion. If they didn't do something now, the Relentless and the artifact would be lost. The fate of the galaxy would be sealed. "What's our plan?" Leah asked, her voice steady despite the dread that settled in her chest. Ava hesitated for a moment, then spoke with the calm authority that Lee had come to rely on. "We can't defeat them in a conventional battle. But if we can use the artifact's power to disrupt their shields, maybe we can destroy the hammer before it can reach us." Leah knew the risk. The artifact had already proven itself to be unstable, and using it in such a volatile way could mean catastrophe. But the Empire was closing in, and they were running out of options. "You're suggesting we use the artifact on their ship?" Leah asked, her voice sharp. "We don't have time to consider another option," Ava replied. "We can't outrun them. We can't fight them. The artifact is our only shot." Leah turned away from the console, looking out at the stars that now seemed to mock her with their cold distance. The rebel fleet was in tatters, and the Empire's resources were seemingly endless. But she had a duty, a responsibility to the countless lives that depended on her to make the right choice. "All right. Set course for the hammer. Prepare the artifact," Leah said, her voice firm. As the Relentless approached the oncoming Imperial fleet, the tension in the air was palpable. The crew was ready, each person knowing the gravity of what they were about to do. They had fought tooth and nail to survive this long, but now they faced the ultimate gamble. Leah stood in the center of the command deck, her hands clenched at her sides, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The glowing artifact sat at the heart of the ship, its presence vibrating through the entire vessel. It was more than a weapon now. It was their last chance. "Captain, we're within range," Ava called out, pulling Leah from her thoughts. Leah nodded. "Activate the artifact." The entire ship trembled as the artifact's energy surged into the core of the Relentless. The crew gripped their stations, knowing that if the artifact malfunctioned, it could spell doom for them all. The ship's energy systems flared, and Leah felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. The artifact's power was unlike anything they had ever experienced, pure, raw, and capable of unimaginable destruction. Outside, the hammer loomed large, a terrifying behemoth in space, its hull black and foreboding. Leah could see the lights from its weapons systems activating, the Empire preparing for the final assault. The time to hesitate was gone. "Fire," Leah commanded. The Relentless fired first, a massive burst of energy surging from the artifact, streaking across the darkness of space. The power of the blast was blinding, a brilliant arc of light that cut through the void. The hammer didn't have time to react. The blast struck its shields, and the ship groaned under the immense pressure. The shields flickered and began to fail. The entire fleet watched in shock as the hammer's shields crumbled under the force of the artifact's energy. Leah's heart raced. The hammer wasn't defeated yet, but the tide was turning. The artifact had done its job. "Continue the assault," Leah shouted. "We can't let up now." The hammer retaliated with everything it had, launching a massive volley of fire at the Relentless. The ship rocked with each strike, but the shields held, barely. The crew fought back with everything they had, their weapons tearing into the Empire's fleet. "Captain, we're losing power," Ava called. "The artifact's energy is draining too fast." Leah turned to the console, her eyes scanning the readings. The artifact was overloading. If they kept using its power, it would destroy them. "Shut it down," Leah ordered. "Now." But the command came too late. The artifact was already too unstable. In that final, chaotic moment, the artifact's energy reached its breaking point. A massive explosion erupted from the Relentless, an explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. The hammer was consumed by the blast, its massive frame breaking apart as the energy destabilized the very fabric of space around them. Leah shielded her eyes from the blinding light. She could hear the screams of the crew, the alarms blaring through the ship. But through the smoke and chaos, she saw the debris of the Empire's flagship floating in space, the once mighty hammer reduced to nothing more than broken pieces. But victory had come at a cost. In the aftermath of the explosion, the Relentless was severely damaged, its hull battered and torn. The crew had survived, but the artifact's power had come with a terrible price. Leah stood at the center of the command deck, her face pale, her body numb. "We did it," Ava said quietly, but there was no joy in her voice. "We won." Leah didn't respond at first. The weight of the victory was almost too much to bear. They had destroyed the hammer, but the cost had been unimaginable. The artifact had drained them of everything they had. It had saved them, but it had also damned them. The rebellion had struck a decisive blow against the Empire, but the war was far from over. Leah looked out the viewports, seeing the debris of the battle floating in space. She had no illusions about the future. The Empire would regroup. But for now, the galaxy had a brief moment of peace, one that they had earned with blood, sacrifice, and the power of the artifact. And Leah knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. There would be no turning back. The artifact's power had altered the balance of the galaxy, and the consequences of that power were still to come.